The great stone hall of Château Valmont had never been this silent. 300 of the most important people in the wine world stood frozen beneath the vaulted ceiling of the old cellar-turned-ballroom, crystal glasses halfway to their lips, and not one of them was breathing. Under the carved oak lintel above the cellar doors, 2 centuries old, bearing the words the family had lived by since 1826, La vérité est dans la terre. The truth is in the earth. The 200th-harvest gala that critics had flown in from 4 continents to attend had simply stopped. On the little stage stood a young man in a tailored dinner jacket, a bottle in one hand and a microphone in the other, and his hand around the bottle had gone white. And in the shadow of the great oak casks, in a stained gray work coat with a rinsing hose still coiled at his feet, stood the old man they had spent all week calling the barrel washer, the silent cellar hand they had ordered to scrub the vats, carry the crates, and stay out of the light. He was not shouting. He was not even angry. He simply lifted a small, worn silver tasting cup on a ribbon, a Testavan rubbed smooth from 60 years in one hand, dipped it into a glass of the wine the whole room had come to worship, held it to the light, tasted it once, and into the shocked hush he said the words that would end Rémy Valmont's entire world. Stop. Every drop you have tasted tonight is a lie, and I would know. I made the first honest bottle this name ever sold.
A phone lay face up on the sommelier's station at the edge of the stage, its screen still glowing from the call that had just ended. The call that had turned the most powerful people in the room the color of ash. The president of the region's growers' union would not lift her eyes. The estate's managing director had gripped the edge of the tasting table to stay on his feet. And Rémy Valmont. Rémy Valmont, the golden boy whose face was on the cover of every wine magazine in Europe, who had spent the week treating this old man like something the harvest had left in the mud, finally understood exactly whose cellar he had been standing in. To understand how a man in a stained work coat silenced the most important tasting in 200 years in front of 300 witnesses and a live broadcast to every wine capital on earth, and why every powerful person in that hall was suddenly terrified of him, we have to go back a few days, to a loading yard, a dark cellar, and the first cruel thing Rémy Valmont said to the man he thought was nobody. The deep cellar of Château Valmont smelled of wet oak, cool stone, and the slow sweetness of 200 vintages, and Auguste Laforet loved all 3.
He stood alone among the great casks in the half-dark before dawn, 78 years old, lean and unhurried, with reading glasses pushed up into thin white hair and a rinsing hose in one steady hand. Around him rose the quiet architecture the guests upstairs never saw, the long rows of oak barrels breathing in the dark, the stained concrete channels in the floor, the iron gate to the old reserve library where the estate's greatest bottles slept under a film of dust. He was cleaning the empty vats the slow way, the honest way, by hand and by nose, and every few minutes he would draw a little wine from a working barrel into the small silver cup on its ribbon, hold it to the single bulb, breathe it, taste it, and know to the day how the vintage was coming along. He liked the cellar before the lights. Down here, before the cameras and the critics, nobody performed. A wine was just a wine. It was either honest or it wasn't. Because the old man rinsing the barrels was not really the hired cellar hand. His full name, though almost no one alive still used it, was Auguste Laforet, and for 50 years he had been the maître de chai, the cellar master of Château Valmont, the vigneron whose palate had made every great vintage the estate was famous for. The wines that built the name, the bottles critics wrote poems about, the vintages that sold at auction for the price of a house. He had grown them, blended them, and raised them in oak with his own hands. In the small, ferociously particular world of fine wine, the word Valmont on a label had meant for half a century
Exactly one thing. A wine that was truly what it claimed to be. Estate grown, honestly made, with nothing hidden in the bottle but the earth it came from. And the man who had made that name mean something was standing in his own cellar in a borrowed gray coat, pretending to be nobody. You can counterfeit the label, his old teacher used to say. You cannot counterfeit the taste of honest earth.
That teacher was the reason Auguste was standing there at all. 65 years earlier, he had been a hungry boy of 13, the son of a day laborer who picked other men's grapes when a fierce old cellar master named Henri Chapelle had caught him asleep between the barrels where he had crept to escape the cold. Henri had taken him in, fed him, and taught him everything. How a wine is grown in the vineyard and only finished in the cellar. How a true vintage carries the taste of one particular slope in one particular year and can never be faked. How the palate is the last honest judge that no fashion and no fortune can bribe. A bottle is a promise, Henri had told him once, pressing a worn silver taste of vin into his palm. It says, this came from this earth, in this year, made by these hands, and nothing was added to lie to you. Break that promise, stretch it with cheap bulk wine, dress up a bought lot as your own, sell the earth a thing it never grew, and every honest bottle ever made is worth a little less, so you never do it. And Auguste had learned the hardest way what happened when someone did. Late in his life, Henri Chapelle had made one perfect wine of his own, from a tiny hidden parcel of ancient ungrafted vines he had nursed for decades. And a smooth wine merchant had taken the lot to promote it, bottled it under his own trading house, buried Henri's name, and let the old man die forgotten and poor in a rented room while the merchant grew rich on his taste. Standing at his teacher's small, nearly empty funeral, a young Auguste had made a promise that he would build his life around a wine no money could corrupt, and that he would always protect the people who actually make it, the pickers, the cellar hands, the pruners whose backs bend in the vines and whose names never fit on the label. He kept it for 50 years. That was why, at 78, he still knew how to rinse a barrel by hand. It was why he was here.
Because 3 weeks earlier, two things had arrived at the small stone house where the world believed Auguste Laforet had long since retired to die. The first was a thick folder of legal papers, the sale of Château Valmont, the vines, the cellar, the 200-year-old name, to a global luxury conglomerate, a deal so large it would fold 2 centuries of honest earth into a stranger's portfolio of handbags and perfume forever. And it could not close, his old lawyer had reminded him, without his signature, because when he had saved the failing estate 40 years earlier, the grateful family had quietly deeded him something they had long since forgotten, the registered trademark to the chateau's flagship wine, and the deed to the tiny hidden parcel of old vines it was secretly built on. The crown jewel was legally his. The second was a plain envelope with no return address, sent by someone frightened, containing a scrap of paper and a single small sample bottle. On the paper, a photograph, pallets of cheap bulk wine in tanker trucks backed into the chateau's own loading yard at night. And the little bottle held 90 milliliters of the new 200th anniversary Grand Cuvée the estate was about to unveil. And when Auguste tasted it, the back of his neck went cold. It was thin, corrected, industrial, a wine wearing a costume. Someone was about to sell 300 of the most trusted palates in the world a fake at the greatest gala in the history of his estate and put his name over it. So he had done what he always did when the truth was buried somewhere a lawyer's letter could not reach. He had put on a plain coat, taken a seasonal cellar worker's credential under his mother's maiden name, and gone to see with his own eyes and his own tongue what his chateau had become before he signed it away. Into that first gray morning, the young man who would define his week arrived the way he always did, in a wave of noise.
The cellar doors banged open, and Rémy Valmont swept in where the working crew were not used to seeing him. Sunglasses pushed into his hair, a phone in one hand, and an assistant trailing behind. He was 33,
magazine handsome, the celebrated master winemaker and heir of Château Valmont, the youngest scion ever to run the estate, a man whose face sold out tastings and whose every swirl of a glass was filmed. The 200th Harvest Gala was to be his coronation, the night the world agreed he was a genius and the true inheritor of a legend. He looked around the cellar for someone to use, and his eyes landed on the nearest man in a work coat, Auguste. "You, whatever your name is." He held out an empty glass without looking. "There's a vat down here that stinks. Number 9. The drain's backed up. Deal with it. And when you're done, the crates of the anniversary bottling need carrying up to the hall. And mind the labels this time. Last idiot smudged 3 of them." He glanced up, took in the gray coat, the hose, the reading glasses, and a slow, delighted smile spread across his face. The smile of a man who has found something to be amused by. "God, look at you. They really do keep the old fossils down here with the drains, don't they? What are you, 100? Were you here when they planted the vines?" Auguste did not take the glass. "I clean the casks," he said mildly. "And I wouldn't rush vat 9. That drain isn't backed up. That's the smell of a wine that's been racked too hard and stripped. Somebody's been in a hurry with it. Whoever's making that has bruised it."
Rémy lowered his sunglasses an inch, as if seeing him for the first time, and his smile sharpened. His assistant winced. "Let me explain how this works, since clearly nobody has. There are people whose name is on the bottle. That's me. And there are the hands that rinse out the barrels and carry the crates. That's you. The hands don't get opinions, Grandpa." He set the empty glass down on the head of a cask, right on the old oak. "Fix the vat. Carry the crates." Auguste looked at the glass sitting on the cask, and then at the young man, and did not move to pick it up. "I'll remember," he said. He held Rémy's gaze one long second, long enough that something uncertain flickered behind the young man's eyes, some small unease he didn't like. And then he simply lifted the glass off the oak, wiped the ring with the cloth from his pocket, drew a taste from the working barrel into his silver cup, and went back to listening to the wine with his nose. It was the way he wasn't afraid of him that made Rémy decide right there to hate him. Across the cellar, an older man stacking crates looked up and quietly took the whole thing in. Bernard Farr was 63, the estate's chef de culture, the vineyard master, 45 years in the vines, the man whose hands knew every row on every slope, who could tell you which parcel a grape came from by the shape of the leaf. He had pruned through frost and picked through hail and taught half the growers in the valley how to read a ripening berry. The young workers adored him. He kept a wineskin of watered vin ordinaire and a level head for every crisis. He waited until Rémy had swept off toward the tasting room, then crossed to the casks and set a heel of bread and a wedge of cheese down on a barrel head beside Auguste. "Don't mind him," Bernard said. "That one arrived famous and never learned the rest. You eaten yet? You've the look of a man who forgets." "I'll eat," Auguste said, which was what he always said.
"You'll faint," Bernard corrected, in the exact tone of a stern younger brother, and nudged the bread an inch closer. "Long week." Auguste smiled, a real one, the kind almost no one got to see anymore. For all the money and fame pouring through the estate, this man had been kinder to a stranger he took for a broke old seasonal hand in 10 seconds than most of the celebrated people Auguste had poured for across 50 years had ever been to anyone. Bernard Farr did not know he was being kind to the man who had made the chateau's name, who had hired his father before him, whose palate had chosen the very slope Bernard had spent his life tending. That was exactly why it counted. Auguste watched his hands square a crate, sure, honest, unhurried, and thought, at least one thing I built is still standing. He noticed the old vineyard master the way he noticed a perfectly balanced wine, a true thing, in a house he was beginning to suspect had gone rotten at the top. He met the second good soul an hour later
at the bottling line. Ines Morrow was 22, a cellar apprentice on a temporary contract, checking fill levels with the tight, careful precision of someone who could not afford one wrong move. Auguste knew that posture, someone who sent most of a modest wage home, in Ines's case to a mother and a younger brother in the city, and lay awake at night terrified that one wrong word from the wrong person could end the little foothold she had. When a line supervisor snapped at her for a labeling fault that wasn't hers, and she flinched and knocked a tray of corks scattering across the floor, a colleague sighing loudly, Auguste crouched and helped her gather them, unhurried. "First harvest with this estate?" he asked. "Is it that obvious?" she whispered.
"You already did the hard part," Auguste said, ordering the corks back into the tray. "You walked into a 200-year-old cellar full of legends, terrified, and you're doing the work anyway. That's the whole craft." He smiled. "Your palate's honest, by the way. I watched you taste that press sample and mark it down straight, not the way the supervisor wanted it read." Ines laughed, surprised, grateful, and something in her shoulders dropped an inch. What Auguste did not say, because he could not yet, was that he had a very good guess who had mailed a frightened envelope with a photograph and a little sample bottle to a stone house 3 weeks before. He said nothing, but he filed away Inez's carefulness beside Bernard's kindness and had no idea yet how much both would matter before the week was out. Kindness, Henri Chapelle used to say, is the one thing you never have to correct in the blend, and it always shows up in the finish when you least expect it. He had no idea how hard the next few days were about to test all of it. If you want to understand how much power a 33-year-old can have when no one has ever told him no, you only had to watch Rémy Valmont move through Château Valmont in the week before the gala.
Doors were held. The good tasting room was kept at his preferred temperature. A press visit was pushed an hour because he wanted the light on the portrait in the Great Hall changed first. He had inherited a genuine name and a manufactured genius, handed the estate young by a family that knew a handsome face sells more bottles than patience, and somewhere along the way he had stopped tasting the wine and started tasting the applause. He had also, though the workers did not yet know it, inherited a problem the size of the estate. The chateau was drowning in debt. The great old reserves nearly sold off. The vineyards mortgaged, everything propped up on loans and the promise of one enormous sale. He wore his certainty like his watch, expensive, always visible, telling everyone a time that suited only him. He believed the rules were a thing that happened to smaller people, the ones who carried the crates. And from the moment he arrived that week, he made the people who actually made the wine his entertainment. It started small, the way cruelty always does. On the first afternoon, Auguste quietly moved 3 crates of the anniversary bottling out of the damp draft by the loading door, where the labels would lift. Rémy, holding court for 2 visiting buyers, made him carry them back into the draft while he explained, loudly, that this is exactly the trouble with the old hands. They fuss over a bottle like it's a baby, when the only thing that sells a wine now is the story and the score. He left the crates in the damp and, as a joke, dropped a coin into Auguste's coat pocket. "For the labor," he said. Auguste, who could have ended the young man's career with a single telephone call, only said, "I'll leave it in the picker's tip jar," and set the coin on the mantel of the crew room on his way past. It cost him nothing to keep his voice level. It cost Rémy more than he knew to be watched that closely by a man taking notes he could not see. Then the wine itself became the stage. Because here was the thing that truly drove Rémy that week. The gala had to be enormous. He had staked everything: the estate's survival, his own legend, the sale he was about to sign, on the 200th harvest being hailed as the arrival of a genius who had reinvented a sleeping estate. And so he swept through the cellar, demanding the anniversary cuvée be richer, darker, more spectacular, more instantly impressive than honest wine from a single estate could ever be. He never once asked the only question that mattered, the question a cellar full of frightened professionals was too afraid to raise aloud.
whether what the critics tasted on the night would actually be Valmont, grown on its own slopes, made in its own cellar, the way the name above the door had promised for 200 years. One person had tried to ask it. Her name was Camille Roux, the estate's oenologist, the woman who ran the laboratory, who signed the analyses certifying that the wine was estate-grown and unadulterated. Auguste first saw her on the second day, in the glass-walled lab off the cellar, arguing quietly and hopelessly with the managing director. "I'm telling you, I won't put my name to it," Camille was saying, keeping her voice down. "You want me to certify the anniversary cuvée as estate-grown when half of it is bulk wine trucked in from the co-op, corrected with concentrate and additives? That is not blending for consistency. That is fraud. If this gets out, it is my license, my whole career." "You'll certify what you're given," came the answer, smooth and final. "The gala is in 5 days. The buyer's people have signed off on the story. Do your job quietly, Camille, and do it carefully. This night is spoken for."
Auguste, coiling a hose in the shadows with his back turned, went very still. Bulk wine? Trucked in? Dressed as estate? He had built the standard this name lived by with his own hands. And estate wine was not a marketing word, it was the whole promise. Someone above the workers was preparing to tell 300 of the world's most trusted palates and a global audience that they were tasting 2 centuries of a single honest earth, when in truth, they would be drinking corrected bulk wine in a beautiful bottle. He wrote nothing down where anyone could see, but a cold, patient anger settled into his chest and did not leave. The man who had spoken to Camille was Gilles Aubert, the managing director of the estate, the smooth, silver-templed executive whose name would stand beside Rémy's on the sale, whose bonus and legacy rode on the deal going through. Gilles was everything Rémy was not: quiet, courteous, gracious, spoken of as the steady hand who had saved the chateau. And that, Auguste would come to understand, was exactly what made him more dangerous than any spoiled heir. Rémy broke things loudly. Gilles broke them in a lowered, reasonable voice, with a warm hand on your shoulder, and made you feel unreasonable for smelling the rot. And the cruelty spread, the way it always does, to whoever was most exposed. That someone was Bernard.
It happened at the vine marking rehearsal. Bernard IV, 45 years, the surest hands on the estate, had been promised the one honor of his long life: to lead the ceremonial first cut of the 200th harvest, to walk the guests into the oldest vineyard and open the picking himself, exactly as he had dreamed of since he was a boy carrying baskets behind his father down these same rows. He was showing 2 junior pickers where the old vines began, when Rémy decided the old man was boring his guests. No. God, listen to him drone," Rémy said, loud enough for the visitors drifting past, pulling out his phone to film. "This is meant to be the emotional heart of the whole gala, and we've got Grandpa here giving a soil lecture. Say something for the camera, old-timer." "Nothing?" He circled Bernard with the phone while the old vineyard master stood with his pruning knife frozen in his hand, too proud to answer, too dignified to perform, his jaw tight. Auguste crossed the row before he had decided to. He stepped between the phone and the old man, not roughly, just decisively, and rested one hand lightly on a gnarled old vine. "These are the ungrafted vines, pre-phylloxera rootstock, the oldest on the estate," he said quietly, as if to Bernard alone. "There's maybe 100 of them left in the world. He's not droning. He's the only man here who knows which ones they are." He gave Bernard a reason to lower the knife with his dignity intact, and knelt to steady a vine that needed no steadying. Then he stood, turned, and looked once, directly into Rémy's phone with calm, unreadable eyes, until the young man lowered it without quite knowing why. "You," Rémy said, and his voice had gone to ice. "I don't know what your problem is, barrel washer, but I am going to enjoy watching you carry your little bucket out of my cellar." He lifted the phone again and photographed Auguste's face. "Smile. I'm sending this straight to Gilles, and to the buyer."
Auguste let him take the photograph. He had a feeling it would be useful later. He was right. He was not finished. cruelty, once rewarded, always spreads to whoever is bravest as well as whoever is weakest. And when Inez quietly brought Bernard a cup of water in the crew room afterward and murmured that filming him wasn't right, one of Remy's assistants overheard and reported it, and Rémy turned the full weight of his boredom on the girl. "Did the little apprentice have an opinion?" he said, finding Inez at the bottling line. "What's your name?" "No, don't bother. There's no point learning it. You're a temp. One word from me to the fixer and you never pick up another cellar contract in this valley or the next one. That's how it works, sweetheart. I don't remember your name. I don't have to. That's the whole point of being me and the whole point of being you." Inez's eyes filled, but she did not look away, and she did not apologize. Auguste watched a frightened young woman hold her ground for an old man who could do nothing for her, and felt the last of his patience turn into something harder and more useful. Later, passing the line, he said quietly, so only she could hear, "You did the right thing, and whatever you already sent to the people who needed it, you did right there too. Keep a record of what you see this week. Dates, names, exactly as it happens, and keep it somewhere that isn't this estate." Inez went very still and looked at him with something between fear and hope, and did not ask how he knew. "Why?" she whispered. "Because," Auguste said, "people who write things down are much harder to erase than people who stay quiet."
That evening, Auguste watched the machine of it all lay itself out clean. Rémy had not merely insulted him, he had humiliated a loyal old vineyard master, threatened a frightened apprentice, and above them both, a courteous director was quietly preparing to sell corrected bulk wine to the world and call it 2 centuries of honest earth. Because an estate that needed the money and an heir who needed the legend had decided together that the biggest night in 200 years was worth not asking too loudly what was actually in the bottle. He was not raging, he was charting. And a man who charts is far more dangerous than a man who shouts.
Late that night, when the cellar was dark and the last of the crew had gone, Auguste did 2 quiet things. First, he let himself into the old reserve library with a key the family had forgotten he still held, and by the light of a single bulb, he found what he feared. The racks that should have held the last of the great old vintages, the honest wines he had made decades ago, stood nearly empty, the bottles quietly sold off to cover debt, and in their place, case upon case of the new anniversary bottles waiting to be presented as the treasure of the cellar. Second, he drew the cork on one of the anniversary bottles, poured a measure into his silver cup, and tasted the way only he could. And there it was, the flat, faintly sweet correction of concentrate, the dull edge of a wine stretched with bulk lots, and underneath, the total absence of the one thing every true Valmont had carried for 50 years. Because in every honest vintage he had ever made, Auguste had blended in a few percent from Henri's tiny hidden parcel of ancient ungrafted vines, a secret, undocumented signature, a taste of wild iron and violet from a plot no map recorded and no one else knew existed. It was the fingerprint a thief could never copy because he did not know it was there. This wine did not have it. It could not. He recorked the bottle, noted the lot numbers, and pocketed the truth. He did not yet know how far up the rot reached, but he had a feeling, and he was right. The gala was supposed to end the way every Rémy Valmont production ended, with the critics swooning, the paperwork smoothing itself out, and the 200th harvest sweeping to a standing ovation and a record price. And for a day, it looked like it would. But Auguste had spent 50 years learning to read a wine, and now, quietly, he began to read the people around it, and the story they told was uglier than any corrected bulk lot.
It came together in pieces. A word overheard through the lab glass, an archive ledger left open, and the wine itself, the centerpiece of the whole gala, printed on every invitation and every broadcast trailer as the treasure of the century, a single barrel of the founder's lost reserve, a wine Rémy had told the world he had personally rediscovered and finished, the last great cask made the old way, raised by my own hand, the bottle that would anchor the sail and crown him a genius. Auguste had asked, mildly, to taste it, a cellar hand's idle curiosity while a vat settled. And when Gilles' assistant left the sample room unlocked for an hour, Auguste drew a measure into his silver cup, and the back of his neck went cold for the second time that week. Because he knew this wine. He knew every note of it. He had made it himself 40 years earlier, in the greatest vintage of his life, and had laid down a handful of barrels never to be sold, sealed in the reserve library, meant to be opened honestly long after he was gone, as a gift to whoever still cared for the estate. Rémy Valmont had not rediscovered and finished anything. He had found Auguste's sealed reserve in the archive, poured it into a new bottle, inked his own name across it, and dressed the theft up as the arrival of his genius. And there, in the long finish, buried where no ordinary taster would ever think to look for it, was the thing that turned suspicion into certainty. The faint, unmistakable note of wild iron and violet. The taste of Henri's tiny hidden parcel of ancient ungrafted vines. The clos oublié, the forgotten plot no map recorded. Auguste had woven a few % of it into every true wine he ever made, a secret thank you to the teacher the world forgot, documented nowhere, explained to no one. It sat in Rémy's rediscovered reserve, note for note, untouched, because a thief pours what he finds and can never counterfeit a signature he does not know is there.
Because here was the thing the workers did not know. The chateau behind the famous label was nearly broke. 2 centuries of prestige had been run into the ground on debt and vanity. The great old vintages quietly auctioned off, the vineyards mortgaged, everything propped up on the promise of one enormous exit, the sale of the whole estate, land and cellar and name, to Rémy's buyer, a global luxury group that wanted a legendary chateau the way it wanted any trophy, as a brand to be licensed, stamped on gift boxes, and streamed as a story. And a 200th harvest that delivered 2 headlines, a flawless anniversary cuvée, and the revelation of a rediscovered founder's reserve finished by a young genius, was exactly what would drive the price into the stratosphere. Rémy did not care whether a single drop on the night had come from the estate's own earth. He cared that 300 critics, a global audience, and one very rich buyer all believed it had. He was not alone in the lie. Gilles Aubert, the courteous managing director, the steady hand who had saved the chateau, had staked his reputation and a career-defining payout on the sale going through. And when the estate's own enologist brought him a problem, he did what men like Gilles always do. He made it disappear. The problem had a name, and Auguste heard it spoken through the lab glass the way he heard everything that week, by being invisible. I ran every analysis twice, Gilles, Camille Roux was saying, low and desperate. The anniversary cuvée isn't estate wine. The sugar profile, the isotope ratios, they don't match our slopes. Half of it was grown 200 kilometers away and trucked in from a co-op, then corrected with concentrate and additives to fake age. You want me to sign a certificate of estate origin on it? That's not a house blend. That's fraud. Label fraud, appellation fraud, and it's my signature and my license on the line. And Gilles' voice, smooth and cold and reasonable. You'll call it a traditional assemblage in the house style, which is technically true. There is wine in it, and we have a house. You will not put the word bulk or concentrate in a document with this crest on it, 3 days before the most important sale of my life. Auguste, coiling a hose in the dark, went very still. There it was, in a single sentence. An honest woman who had found the truth, and a powerful man ordering her to bury it. It was Henri Chapelle and the merchant, 50 years later, in a better suit.
His teacher's whole ruin, happening again in real time, 3 days before it would cheat 300 of the world's most trusted palates, deceive a continent, and sell his life's name to strangers on the back of a lie in a bottle. And here the story turned, because Camille Rowe did not, at first, do the brave thing. She was afraid. Afraid the way a single mother with a mortgage and a license is afraid. And she signed the first certificate Gilles put in front of her, telling herself traditional assemblage was a form of words she could sleep beside. Auguste saw the moment it happened, saw the good woman fold, and did not judge her for it. He had watched fear do worse to better people. He simply noted, quietly, that Camille had drawn and hidden a full set of reference samples and lab records instead of destroying them as instructed. The small, stubborn act of a conscience not yet dead. A person who keeps the evidence, Auguste knew, is a person still deciding which way to jump. And then they came for Bernard.
Because Bernard IV had tasted it too, pulled a glass of the anniversary cuvée in the crew room, gone pale, and said aloud, to the wrong person, that no wine grown 2 valleys away and trucked in at night was going out under the name of vines he had tended for 45 years, and that he would not walk a single guest into his old vineyard to bless a lie. When the plan held and the ceremonial first cut was quietly reassigned to a photogenic junior, Bernard refused to stay silent about it. Within the hour, Rémy had his pretext. A batch of the anniversary bottling was discovered, spoiled, tainted, undrinkable, and the ruin was pinned on the old vineyard master, who had access to the cellar and had suddenly become inconvenient. 45 years erased in a single meeting. Bernard IV was escorted off the estate with his pruning knife in one hand and a cardboard box in the other, accused of negligent contamination and conduct damaging to the chateau, his final wages and his pension frozen pending investigation. That detail was not a small one. Bernard had been promised one thing at the end of his long life, that he would lead the ceremonial first cut of the 200th harvest, walk the guests into the oldest vineyard, and open the picking with his own hands. The crowning moment of a life given to a single hillside, the thing he would tell his grandchildren about. The same letter that fired him for a spoiled batch he had not touched took that away, and handed his moment to a stranger for the cameras. So Rémy Valmont's need for a fortune had not merely humiliated an old man for boring his guests. It had thrown away the 2 people, an enologist and a vineyard master, honest enough to say the wine was a lie, and cleared away the last hands that might have stopped a fake from going out under the founder's name.
When Auguste saw Bernard carry his box to the gate, stopping to lay one weathered hand flat on the old stone post he had walked past for 45 years, the way you would say goodbye to an old friend, something in him that had stayed patient all week went very still and very cold. This was the line the whole week had been walking toward. Not a cruel joke, not a filmed insult. A vineyard master thrown away, an enologist frightened into silence, and corrected bulk wine about to be poured under his own name to a room full of people who had crossed the world to taste the truth. He found Bernard on a low wall by the gate, box across his knees, staring at the vines. 45 years, Bernard said, not bitter, just lost. I know every stone on that slope. My father picked these grapes, and his father. And they say I spoiled a batch. Me, who would sooner cut off my own hand than let a bad barrel out. So a boy in a nice jacket doesn't have to hear the word bulk. He looked at the box. They promised me the first cut. My first harvest, I was a boy carrying baskets behind my father down those rows. I wanted my last one to be leading the guests in. What do I tell my grandchildren now? That their grandfather ended as the man who poisoned the anniversary wine? Auguste sat down beside him. For a long moment he said nothing. A
above them, the oldest vines caught the last light on the slope. "Bernard," he said finally, and his voice had changed. Something underneath it had gone very quiet and very hard. "I need you to trust me for one day. Don't sign whatever they send you. Don't cash anything. Be here tomorrow night, in your good jacket, ready to walk into that vineyard when I come for you." "Walk in and do what, my friend?" They decided. "People like them always win the night." "Not this night," Auguste said, and put his hand over the old man's. "One day, and after tomorrow, you will never again have to ask a boy like that for permission to matter."
Then Auguste walked to the quiet end of the wall, took the worn silver taste-of-vin from his coat pocket, and held it in his palm the way he had held it at a small and nearly empty funeral 50 years before. He thought about Henri Chapel, dying forgotten in a rented room while a merchant grew rich on his taste. He thought about a promise, and he took out an old phone and dialed the 2 numbers he had been saving all week. Maître Sylvie Bertrand had been Auguste Laforet's lawyer for 30 years and did not rattle easily. When her phone rang the night before the gala and the screen said Auguste, she sat up. "Tell me what you're tasting," Sylvie said. "A lie about to be sold as 2 centuries of honest earth under my name to the whole world for a fortune," Auguste said, and told her everything. The corrected bulk wine trucked in at night, the faked estate origin, the missing signature of the Clos Oublié, the sealed reserve stolen from the archive with his name scratched off and Rémy's inked on, the forged certificate, the oenologist frightened into signing, the vineyard master fired on a lie, and a boy claiming the founder's greatest wine as his own rediscovery. When he finished, there was a short silence. "You could end this tonight," Sylvie said. "One letter. You refuse your signature, you withhold the trademark and the deed to the old parcel, the sale collapses. The gala is canceled. So tell me why you haven't." "Because a quiet letter is a bad night for them, and a lesson for no one," Auguste said. "I've watched this estate bend honest people all week, Sylvie. The rot isn't one bottle. It's a boy who was taught that the name is a thing you sell, and the workers are a thing you switch out. If I send a letter, his lawyers bury it. The gala quietly postpones for technical reasons. And in a year, the same fraud surfaces in another deal with the same forged papers. I don't want it postponed." "Then don't make the scene," Sylvie said, and Auguste could hear the old lawyer smiling. "Build the case. Move quietly. And let them make the scene at their own gala." What followed over the next day was a masterclass in patience. Auguste did not storm the tasting room or announce who he was. Working the phone from the shadow of the great casks, he did what 50 years of wine had taught him. He gathered the truth until it was too heavy for any fortune to lift. First, the chemistry. Through Sylvie, he had Camille's hidden reference samples and lab records placed quietly and lawfully before an independent wine fraud laboratory. The verdict was clean and merciless. The anniversary cuvee's isotope and trace element profile did not match the Valmont slopes. A majority of it had been grown hundreds of kilometers away and stretched with grape concentrate and additives to fake the depth of age. A winemaker could argue about style. No one could argue with an isotope ratio that placed half the wine in another region entirely.
Second, the wine's own body. Every genuine Valmont for 50 years carried the taste of the Clos Oublié, the wild iron and violet signature Auguste had never published and never explained. He was, quite literally, the only person alive who could name it, point to the hidden parcel on the deed in his own name, and prove that the rediscovered reserve had been poured from a Laforet wine the thief never understood well enough to launder. Sylvie quietly secured the archive, the sealed reserve records, the founder's original cellar book in Auguste's hand, dated 40 years earlier, his mark still on the page beneath Rémy's fresh ink. Third, the paper. Lawfully and without a sound, the fabricated story was preserved beside the truth.
The tanker delivery logs and co-op purchase invoices for the bulk wine, the forged traditional assemblage origin certificate, and Gio's own messages, which a foundation council, once Sylvie made clear what was coming, was compelled to keep. Get it certified before the buyer's inspection. Call it a house assemblage and lock the file. Nobody retests a gala wine once the scores are printed. Fraud, in writing with a name on it. And beside it, the thing that turned theft into betrayal. The archive access log, showing whose key had opened the sealed reserve and when. But building a case in daylight is one thing. Staying invisible while a great estate wakes up around you is another. And here, the day turned genuinely tense. Because Rémy's buyer had not built a global luxury empire by being careless. Her due diligence team was crawling over every contract and corner of Château Valmont that week. And when they heard that a seasonal cellar hand had been asking questions in the archive and making calls from quiet corners, an assistant was sent to find out who the strange old man in the gray coat really was.
For an hour, the walls tightened. If anyone made one call to the right desk and learned that the barrel washer holding a 9-figure sale in his calloused hands was Auguste Laforet himself, the true vigneron, the one signature the whole deal depended on, the lawyers would freeze every file, and the forged certificate, the delivery logs, the sealed cellar book might vanish into a shredder before anyone could secure them. Auguste called Sylvie. "They're looking for me," he said. "If they learn who I am before the records are sealed, it all walks." "Then we let them find exactly what we wish them to find," Sylvie said. It was almost too easy. Auguste Laforet had not been photographed in 20 years. He had withdrawn from the world so completely that the wine press spoke of him as a recluse who might already be dead. There was no recent face to match to the name. The staffing agency confirmed to the estate only that the worker was credentialed seasonal cellar labor, true, dull, impenetrable, while the forensics finished and Sylvie sealed the files. Reassured that the odd old man in the gray coat was just an overqualified retired cellarman padding a pension, the due diligence team moved on. It was the last thing they would get wrong before the gala. Rémy, meanwhile, made a mistake of his own. He tried to buy a witness. He had noticed the young apprentice, the one with the opinion, writing in a little notebook, and it made him uneasy in a way he could not name. So he had an assistant find Inez in a corridor and offer her an envelope, 3 months' wages in cash, more, to sign a short statement saying the old vineyard master had spoiled the batch through negligence, and that the anniversary cuvée was pure estate wine, grown and made at Valmont.
For one long moment, Inez thought about her mother, her younger brother, the rent, everything she had to lose. And then she thought about an old man in a gray coat who had told her that people who write things down are harder to erase. "No," she said. Her voice shook, but she said it. "You want the difference between me and you? I work the bottling line. I've read the delivery logs. I've tasted what's in that bottle and what's on our slopes, and they are not the same wine." She pushed the envelope back. "I'm not for sale." She walked away on legs that barely held her and went straight to the old man in the gray coat and pressed into his hands a notebook of dates and names in careful handwriting, and folded inside it the thing she had been too frightened to act on for 3 weeks, her own photograph of the tankers backed into the yard at night and the little sample bottle's twin. "I sent one to the Growers Union too," Inez whispered. Auguste took the notebook the way another man would take gold. That was the estate's fatal error. They had not merely faked a wine and crushed 2 honest people, they had now tried to buy a false statement from a frightened young apprentice, brave enough to refuse and honest enough to report it. The case had grown its sharpest edge, and they had handed it over themselves. The emotional low point came the next evening, in the hours before the gala. Bernard Foray, back by the gate in his good jacket, as promised, but no longer believing, called his grandson to say he might not have the harvest story to tell after all. Auguste caught only the end of it. No, it's not your fault. Your grandfather is just between things right now." and then sat with the dead phone in his lap, and for the first time, stopped believing it would come right. And Camille Rowe found Auguste by the casks, pale and sleepless. "I signed it," Camille said, her voice breaking. "I told myself the words let me off. I have a daughter, a license, a mortgage. I was a coward. And now my name is on a fraud, and there's a good old man carrying his own box out the gate for a spoiled batch I could disprove with one analysis." Auguste looked at her for a long moment, without anger. "You kept the samples, Camille," he said gently. "You were told to destroy them, and you didn't. Cowards destroy the evidence. You were just waiting for a reason to be brave. I'm gonna give you one." He stood between the frightened oenologist and, in his mind, the fired vineyard master and the trembling apprentice, and made himself say the hardest sentence in the whole plan. "One more day. Give me one day. And then, I promise, you will never again have to wonder whether the truth was worth telling."
Meanwhile, on the surface, nothing had changed, which is what made the noose so tight. The certificate was in the file. The stolen reserve stood in its single crowning barrel, with Rémy's name on it. The corrected bulk wine waited in its beautiful anniversary bottles. And Rémy, in his first fitting for the dinner jacket, was already rehearsing his triumph, filming himself beside the great casks for the millions who did not know his estate was one signature away from ruin. He caught the old man's eyes across the cellar as he filmed, and smiled, and mouthed, "You're finished." "You keep saying it's your chateau," Auguste said quietly, to no one, watching him from the shadows. "Say it a little louder tomorrow night." With the hall already filling for the gala, an unexpected ally walked back through the cellar door. Camille Rowe, no longer pale and folded, carrying a slim case of sample vials and a single page. That's the full reference set, the isotope report, the delivery logs, and the certificate Gilles dictated. And a signed statement of everything he told me to bury, she said, setting them in Auguste's hands. "I withdrew my certification an hour ago, in writing, to the Growers' Union and the Appellation Board. I should have done it the day he threatened me. Whatever you're about to do out there, I'll stand at that tasting table and pour the truth the instant you give the word. And I'll say every word of this to the union, to the board, to anyone who asks." Auguste looked at Camille's vials, and Inez's notebook, and the sealed cellar book, and the forensic report no palate could argue with, and knew the case was whole.
There was one last piece. Sylvie called him back. "It's done," she said. "The president of the Growers' Union is an old friend of yours, and she remembers exactly whose cellar taught her to taste. She'll be in the hall tonight, with an appellation fraud officer beside her, and on this evidence, she is prepared to state publicly that the wine is not what it claims to be, and to refer the certificate for prosecution. And the sale cannot close without your trademark and your deed, Auguste. It never could." Her voice warmed. Auguste slid the phone into his coat, felt the worn silver cup against its chest, and looked out from the shadows at the brightening hall, the arriving critics, the great crowning barrel of stolen reserve, and a young man in a dinner jacket filming his own coronation. In a few minutes, the whole room was going to learn who the barrel washer really was. The great stone hall of Château Valmont blazed with candlelight. 300 guests filled the vaulted cellar ballroom. Critics, buyers, sommeliers from the world's great restaurants. The cameras of a global broadcast hung in the dark. The region's most powerful names lined the front tables. And above the doors, carved in oak, stood the words that had meant an honest bottle for 200 years. La vérité est dans la terre. At the best table sat Véronique Chastain, chief of the luxury group, arrived to watch the trophy she was about to buy. Beside her, Gilles Aubert smoothed his silver-templed hair. And in the shadow of the casks, in a stained gray coat, stood Auguste Laforet,
The lights dropped to a single warm pool. Rémy Valmont walked out to the little stage to a standing ovation, a glass of the crowning reserve raised in his hand. He bowed and lifted the bottle. The sommeliers began to pour the anniversary cuvée down the long tables, and 300 glasses rose to the light. Except that Auguste, in the shadows, was watching the critics' faces as they tasted. The small, quickly hidden frowns, the second sip that tried to find what the first had missed, the polite confusion of trained palates being told a thin, corrected wine was a masterpiece. And a voice from the shadow of the casks said clearly, without heat, "Stop. Stop pouring." The room turned. A murmur ran through the tables. Remy's smile froze, but the sommeliers kept pouring for one endless, damning second before a hand near the stage waved them still. Remy's face curdled as he saw who had spoken. "That's the barrel washer," he said, loud enough to carry, with a little laugh. "Someone get him out of here. The poor old man's wandered up from the cellar. He's confused. Get him a chair and call someone." "Every drop you have tasted tonight came from somewhere it is lying about," Auguste said, walking out of the shadows into the candlelight, unhurried, small and steady in his gray coat. "And I would know. I made the first honest bottle this name ever sold." And at that moment, two things happened at once. A woman rose from a front table, the president of the Growers' Union, quietly showing her credentials, an appellation fraud officer beside her. And Auguste's phone, set on the sommelier's station, lit up on the room's speakers, loud in the sudden hush. A voice came from it, clear across the whole hall. "This is the Regional Growers' Union, with the Appellation Fraud Office present. Let the record show the wine served as tonight's anniversary cuvée has been certified by no valid authority, and on the evidence before us is bulk wine of mixed origin presented as estate grown. It may not be sold or broadcast as Château Valmont." Veronique Chastain's glass stopped halfway to her lips, and the old man in the gray coat reached into his pocket and drew out not a card, but the worn silver testament on its ribbon, dipped it into Remy's crowning glass of rediscovered reserve, held it to the candlelight, and tasted the single true mouthful in the room. "Confirmed," Auguste said into the phone. Not loudly, because he did not need to. "Auguste Laforet. I was the maitre d'chai of this chateau for 50 years. I made every vintage that built this name, and my mark is burned into every honest cask in that cellar. I'm here. Not one bottle poured tonight is what it claims to be, and I will not let a lie be sold to the world under my name." And the whole hall turned the color of ash. Gilles gripped the edge of the table. The sommelier set down her decanter as if it had grown hot, and Rémy Valmont stood frozen on the stage, bottle trembling in his hand, as the pieces slammed together in his mind. The barrel washer, fix the vat, the hands that rinse the barrels, stay out of the shot, I'll send your photo to the buyer. Every contemptuous word he had said that week, he had said to the one man on earth who could turn his fortune into a silenced room. Auguste reached the stage and turned to the hall. And here he did the thing that made it undeniable. Not with a screen, not with a slideshow, but with the one instrument every person in that room had been trained to trust above all others, their own palate.
"You don't have to take my word for any of this," he said. "You have tongues." He beckoned, and from the shadows came Inès Moreau with a tray of clean glasses, and Camille Roux with 3 unlabeled bottles, and behind them Bernard IV in his good jacket, straight-backed. 3 wines, no labels, Auguste said. Taste them blind, the way you built your reputations. The first is the anniversary cuvée you have been calling a masterpiece all evening. The second is honest, cheap wine from the co-op 200 kilometers north. The glasses went down the front tables. 300 of the finest palates in the world tasted and tasted again. And the room began to murmur, because any honest taster in that hall could tell that the first glass and the second glass were the same thin, corrected wine, and that only the third had the depth, the structure, the long living finish of an estate that meant its name.
"The wine you toasted," Auguste said quietly, "and the cheap bulk lot are the same wine in different clothes." A gasp moved through the tables like wind through a vineyard.
Then he did something no forger could answer. He lifted his silver cup of Rémy's rediscovered reserve and had Inès pour a measure of true old Valmont beside it. "Now taste these two together," he said. "In the finish of both, a note of wild iron and violet, there, right at the end. That comes from a tiny parcel of ancient vines no map records and no one in this room knew existed, because I planted it from my teacher's cuttings, and I have never spoken of it to a soul. I put a few drops of it into every honest wine I ever made for 50 years. He looked at Rémy, almost with pity. "It is in the reserve you told the world you rediscovered and finished, note for note, because you didn't rediscover anything. You found my sealed barrels in the archive, poured them into a new bottle, and inked your name on my life's work. You cannot counterfeit a palate, Rémy." "Now here is what the tongue can't catch on its own," Auguste said, and Camille Roux stepped forward, report in hand, steady now. "Madame Roux is the enologist this estate frightened into signing. Camille?" She laid the isotope report and the delivery logs on the tasting table and connected a call on the speakers to the independent fraud laboratory. A voice filled the hall. "Confirmed independently this afternoon. The anniversary cuvé's isotope and trace element signature places the majority of the wine hundreds of kilometers from this estate, stretched with concentrate and additives. It is not estate-grown wine, full stop." Camille set the physical logs on the table for anyone to see. "I tested it twice," she said. "I signed one certificate out of fear, and I withdrew it this evening. Every word here is true, and I'll swear to it before any authority in the world."
Then the appellation fraud officer stepped forward and, one by one, laid the documents flat on the table. No projector, just paper under the candlelight, passed hand to hand along the front rows. The tanker delivery logs, the co-op purchase invoices, the forged traditional assemblage certificate, Gilles' own messages in his own words. Call it a house assemblage and lock the file. And beside them, Auguste laid two things together. His sealed cellar book, dated 40 years earlier in his own hand, and the archive access log. "This is the wine he told you he rediscovered and finished," Auguste said. "And this is the cellar book of the man who actually made it, sealed in that archive before this young man could tell a barrel from a bucket. He didn't rediscover a drop." And Inès, the young apprentice, stepped forward, chin level, and set her notebook beside the papers, open to the page. "I work the bottling line," she said. "I watch the tankers come in at night, and they offered me money last night to sign that it was all estate wine." The hall read it all in silence. Real wine on the tongue, real paper, real handwriting, the true vintage still warm in 300 mouths. And somewhere in the tables, a famous critic said, very quietly, "We were about to score a lie." And then, before Auguste could go on, Rémy found his voice, and it came out as mockery, because mockery was the only armor he had ever needed. "This is theater," he said, laughing, turning to the hall, to the cameras. "A senile old barrel washer and a disgruntled field hand. My name is on this estate. I have the title, I have the contract, and I will not have my gala hijacked by," he gestured at Auguste, "by the help."
Auguste let him finish. Then he lifted a clean glass, poured 3 unlabeled wines into 3 glasses himself, and held them out to Rémy. "Then prove me a liar, Rémy. You told the world you have the finest palate in a generation. One of these is the wine you say you made. One is co-op bulk, one is true Valmont. You can't, can you?" Auguste said softly, "because you never made it." Gilles tried once more, smooth even now. "Monsieur Laforet, whatever your history with this cellar, you have no operational role. The sale is a private matter, and..." "The sale needs my trademark and my deed, Monsieur Robert," Auguste said. "It always did. I never gave away the flagship or the old parcel it's built on, and I am not going to lend my name to a lie in a bottle tonight." And here Véronique Chastain rose, but she did not bluster, and she did not flee, and she did not, as a lesser buyer might, pretend to be a wronged victim. She did something colder and quicker. She reached instantly for the profit in the wreckage. "Monsieur Laforet," she said, her voice smooth and carrying, turning to face him with a connoisseur's small smile. "Let us be adults. A scandal tonight, yes, but scandals fade, and a 200-year-old name does not. If anything, you have just made this estate more interesting. My offer stands, lowered naturally to reflect tonight's difficulties. Every asset has a price, especially a damaged one. Name yours." She was already recalculating in real time, treating an old man's life's work and a room full of betrayed workers as a discounted lot to be picked up cheap now that the seller was on his knees.
Auguste looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time that night, something almost like a dry smile touched his mouth. "You spent 3 weeks and a team of accountants inspecting this chateau, madame," he said. "And the one thing none of you thought to taste was the wine. You didn't want an estate. You wanted a label with a good story to stamp on a gift box." He set the taste-of-on down on the table between them. "It is not for sale." Véronique held his gaze, recognized a wall she could not buy through, and simply gathered her coat and made for the door with her lawyers, already on the phone repricing something else, which was, Auguste reflected, its own kind of confession. Then he looked, last, at Rémy. And Rémy Valmont, who had never in his life been refused, came apart, but not quietly. He shouted, and the mockery was gone now, and something raw and ugly underneath it. "You disappeared for 20 years and let it rot on the vine, and I saved it. Do you know what the debts looked like? I put this name back on magazine covers. I filled this hall. I made it matter again. Without me, it's a dusty museum nobody visits." He wheeled to the sommeliers and the workers along the walls and jabbed the bottle at them. "Pour it!" And not one hand lifted. The sommeliers set down their decanters. Bernard folded his arms. Inez stood still. One by one, down the whole length of the hall, the workers who actually made the wine simply looked at him, and the silence they made was louder than any toast. Panicking, Rémy grabbed a decanter himself and began sloshing the corrected bulk wine into glasses no one would lift, ranting, spilling it dark across the white cloth, until Auguste lifted one hand and the room simply let him pour to no one at all. A young man in a beautiful jacket serving a lie to a hall that would not drink it, until the bottle ran empty in his shaking hand.
He set it down. He looked around the hall for one face that would stand with him, his name on the estate, the workers his family's money paid, 300 guests who had come to crown him, and found Véronique gone, and Gilles staring at the floor, and 100 workers with their arms folded. And in that silence, in his beautiful jacket, Rémy Valmont understood something that would outlast every headline. He had spent his whole life being served, and not one of the people who made his wine would pour a single glass for him now, because he had never once, in all his fame, treated a single one of them as anything but hands. The decanter slipped from his fingers, and when the union officer and the estate's own security came for him, he did not rage. He had nothing left. He let them turn him toward the door, small and silent, a young man refused by an entire hall at once. Auguste watched him go, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost gentle.
"You kept asking me all week which one I was," he said. "A name that goes on the bottle or one of the hands that rinses the barrels.
That was never the question. A great wine doesn't become great because the man on the label swirls his glass hardest. It becomes real when 100 people who will never fit on that label give it their honest hands and are willing to fold their arms when the wine becomes a lie. You can counterfeit a label, Rémy. You can buy a medal and hire a famous nose. You cannot counterfeit the taste of honest earth. And that taste and the name they would have to sell to get it are mine. He set the silver cup down beside the empty decanter. And none of this had to be your ruin. If you'd let the old vineyard master keep his harvest, or listened to your own enologist, or been decent to the girl on the bottling line, you'd have made a smaller, honest wine and lived to build a real name. You were handed one of the last great estates on earth. But Auguste was not finished, because a good ending is never only about who falls, it is about who finally gets to rise. And here he did not reach for his checkbook, because some debts are not paid in money. He turned to Bernard Foray, standing straight-backed by the casks.
"Bernard," he said, "I'm sorry it took so long." He raised his voice for the hall. "This man gave 45 years to these vines and was thrown away on a lie so a boy wouldn't have to hear the word bulk. He knows this earth better than any name that was ever printed on it." Then Auguste did the thing that mattered more than money. But that's justice, and justice isn't a gift. This is the gift. Tomorrow at dawn, the 200th harvest opens, and it will not be opened by a stranger for the cameras. It will be led by the man who has forgotten more about this slope than the rest of us will ever learn. Bernard, walk us into the old vineyard and make the first cut, live, in the vines your father picked and his father before him." And the old man could not speak at all. He simply pressed his weathered hand flat against the nearest cask, the way you would greet an old friend who had waited a long time for you to come home. Then Auguste found Inez standing with her tray. "You were punished this week for the crime of tasting the truth," he said, loud enough for the union still on the line. "That ends tonight. But I'm not going to hand you a prize either. You don't need my charity. You need a cellar and a teacher. Your apprenticeship becomes permanent on the strength of your palate, which is more honest than most in this room. And you'll learn the old way, by hand and by nose, from people who will never once ask you to swear the earth grew something it didn't." Inez pressed the tray to her chest and nodded, unable to speak. "And Madame Roux," Auguste said, "who found the truth, lost her nerve, and then found something rarer than nerve, the courage to undo her own signature, runs the cellar's quality from tonight, with the authority to stop any bottling that isn't honest. Something tells me she'll never be frightened out of it again." Camille wiped her eyes and nodded.
Then Auguste stood alone at the center of his own hall, under the carved words, and dipped the silver taste-of-an one last time into a glass of true Valmont and held it to the candlelight. "There will be no sale," he said simply. "I'm placing this estate and its name in the hands of the people who actually make the wine. The pickers, the cellar hands, the ones whose backs bend in the vines. In a partnership none of them can be switched out of, so that no heir with a good jacket and an empty palate can ever again truck in a lie and sell the earth a thing it never grew. That was the promise I made at a poor man's funeral 50 years ago." He looked out at the hall. Henri Chapelle died believing his wine didn't matter because a merchant put his own name on it. The hall, which had held its breath, finally let it go. The workers were on their feet. A critic began to applaud, and then the whole room rose. 300 of the most powerful palates in the world, standing not for a golden boy on a magazine cover, but for 100 honest hands, and the old man in the gray coat who had spent 50 years protecting them. At the edge of it, quietly, the fraud officer was speaking with Gilles Aubert, who was no longer smooth at all. And Véronique Chastain was already gone. Rémy was gone.
Late that night, when the guests had left and the candles were guttering and the crowning barrel of stolen reserve sat tagged as evidence, Auguste Laforet walked the length of his empty cellar alone, and then, out of pure habit, drew a taste from a working barrel into his silver cup, held it to the last bulb, and nudged a note in his mind the way he had for 60 years, checking, listening, making sure the wine was telling the truth. He didn't do it because anyone was watching. He did it because that, in the end, was the whole point.
In the weeks that followed, though the world would only ever share that one incandescent night in the hall, everything rolled out just as Auguste had promised. The anniversary bottling was pulled and became the opening exhibit in a wine fraud investigation that reached Rémy, Gilles, and the co-op contractors, because selling bulk wine as an estate appellation is not a matter of taste, but of law. Veronique Chastain's group spent a long season explaining to its own board how its due diligence had missed a founder rinsing barrels in the cellar. Camille Roux ran the estate's quality with a spine of steel and never again signed a thing she couldn't prove. Inez Moreau earned her place at the bench and still, at every blind tasting, marked the wine straight and not the way the room wanted it read. Bernard Faure led the harvest for another decade, told his grandchildren the story 100 times, and got his name back with interest. And Auguste Laforet, rather than sell the chateau to anyone, handed its name and its future to the people who actually make the wine, and then, mostly, went back to his small stone house, though he was known to turn up now and then, unannounced, in a gray coat, to taste the new vintage before it was bottled. By nose. The honest way. Rémy Valmont had a famous name, a magazine cover, and 2 centuries of fortune behind it. Bernard Faure had a cardboard box, a frozen pension, and 45 years of treating every vine and every person as though it mattered. Only one of them still had his dignity when the candles burned down.
So here's the question I want you to answer in the comments. Was Auguste right to sign on quietly as the barrel washer and let the whole ugly week play out? The fired vineyard master, the frightened apprentice, the forged papers, before he revealed who he was? Or should he have refused his signature and killed the sale with one phone call the day that little sample bottle reached his door? Tell me below. And be honest about this one too. We have all, at least once, looked straight through the person who rinses the barrels, or carries the crates, or cleans up after the party, and quietly decided they didn't count. If you believe the most valuable thing in that cellar was never the name on the label, that it was 100 pairs of hands nobody thought to look at, and one honest taste that no fortune can buy, or fake, or sell, then subscribe and stay for the next one. Because next time, we're walking into a world-famous watchmaking maison on the night it unveils a priceless grand complication, where the celebrated young master watchmaker who just inherited the house humiliates the silent old man sweeping the workshop floor, never once imagining that the stooped figure with the worn steel tweezers is the legendary horologist whose hands built every masterpiece the family ever sold, and whose initials are engraved inside every movement in that vault. You won't believe how that one ends.